Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, joined by Daniel Gallen. We don't typically bring you a show on Sunday, but this is not your typical Sunday. Penn State has fired James Franklin in year 12 as their head coach. That move was announced on Sunday afternoon. Pat Kraft put out a statement, the athletic director, and something we discussed not too long ago, just last night, deep into the night at Beaver Stadium. We wondered if James Franklin would be joining us for the typical Monday press conference at Beaver Stadium on noon. He will not be, but we will have Pat Kraft. We will have the new interim coach, Terry Smith, a longtime cornerbacks coach here for Penn State. He's been with James Franklin since 2014, and he's also a former Nittany Lions receiver with a lot of roots here. He will lead these Nittany Lions for the next 6 games. Obviously, a wide-scale coaching search is underway. We've got our initial hot board up of potential candidates based on what we're hearing, and obvious some obvious connections to draw between them and Penn State. That's up over at Lions247.com. Mark Brennan has an opinion piece up on our site on Sunday afternoon as well, breaking down why this was the time for Penn State to make this move and why they may have been willing to spend the money to basically show James Franklin the exit door. When the news did break, Daniel Gallen handed that piece for us over at Lions247 and got that up. Daniel, welcome back. We haven't been gone long. This is obviously first and foremost difficult to see happen to any human that you've spent considerable time with. I know people view James Franklin as the football coach. We've gotten to know him some different ways over the past 9 seasons. I referenced it yesterday. I had my grandson up in Beaver Stadium several years ago, my first year on the beat. He was in a cancer battle. James Franklin was great with me, with my godson Parker. He checked in with us multiple times through that process. And so we get to know a guy in a little bit of a different way, but we also acknowledged on the postgame podcast where this program was compared to where they were supposed to be. And that wasn't enough for Pat Kraft right now. Certainly wasn't enough for the fans who voiced their opinion at Beaver Stadium. And Daniel, what was your initial reaction to Penn State making this move on Sunday?
I don't think I was surprised that it happened. I think that the way that post-game news conference had gone, and then the conversations with you, me, Mark, some other people on the beat, sort of what to maybe be prepared for, what to expect, some of the pre-work we did overnight. I think that we were in a position where if it did happen, we wouldn't be surprised. We wouldn't be caught off guard. And I think that was borne out. But yeah, I mean, I had some, friends from, who aren't in the industry reach out to me today and ask. And one of them was just like, what's it like to cover something like this? And this is the 3rd firing of a head coach that I've covered. Randy Edsall got fired at Maryland when I was at the Sun in 2015. I was covering the Eagles when Doug Peterson got fired after the 2020 season. And it's one of those things where, when you're a fan and you're maybe at a remove and you see just the on-field results, and you can do the math a little bit where this stuff has happened, therefore they should be fired. It's a little bit different. I think being closer to it, you get a sense of the scale. Like I was explaining to my friend, I was like, well, there's, you got 100-some players on that football team. Then you've got however many staffers now, especially that Penn State has really ballooned its operation. So another maybe 100 support staffers in that room. Those are all people that are directly affected. All those people have families. All those people have lives. Like the number gets really big really quickly for who is being affected by this. And it goes beyond just James Franklin and beyond just Pat Kraft and beyond just maybe those players in the locker room. I think there's big ripple effects from that. I also think that you've got ripple effects in a place like State College, which is a town that is very dependent on the football economy. And so a good football team means really good things for this area economically. And that is something else that you keep in mind a little bit with news like this. But just from purely the football perspective, though, I think that given what we'd seen things really deteriorate over the past 3 weeks, I think that when I saw, our own Matt Zenitz at 24/7 CBS Sports, I got that tweet pushed to my phone, and it was just kind of like, all right, like, let's go. Then that Penn State confirmation comes out shortly after, and we're off to the races now.
Yeah, and just to kind of review James Franklin, obviously are hyper focused on what has occurred here in the last month of football, the last few weeks of football. Big picture, 11 and a half seasons here with the Nittany Lions, a record of 104-45, a record of 64-36 in Big Ten action. Won the Big Ten championship with that surprise run back in 2016. Followed that up with a Fiesta Bowl win in 2017. Later went on to win the Cotton Bowl in 2019, the Rose Bowl in 2022, and won a couple playoff games last year as Penn State broke through and got into the playoff and went to the national semifinal after appearing in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon. You get to the Oregon matchup this year at 3-0, ranked number 3 in the country. As we said, it's last night. It was only 14 days ago. Now it's 15 days ago, and everything seemed there for the taking for Penn State. And at that point, James Franklin was clearly the king of the castle here for Penn State football. And you would imagine moving forward, we knew that, if things didn't go well against Ohio State and Oregon, there was going to be that similar noise, but no one saw this kind of slide coming with the UCLA loss, followed by the Northwestern loss, and really the performance, not just the loss, but the performance in those games and the body language and the confidence that we have picked up, not just from James Franklin, but really across the board. And speaking to some players and across this program, it is not in the same place that we were accustomed to seeing, especially during a really strong 3-game sample size. And so it's going to be up to the players, especially the peer leaders, to pick themselves up off this. Surely there's an emotional and personal impact when you're talking about a coach who brought you to campus, met a lot of members of your family, probably gave you a hard time at some points, but also gave you some wonderful highlights along the way, I'd imagine, as well. So there is an adjustment period for everyone in that building, but it happens on a Sunday. You've got a full week ahead of you with Terry Smith now at the helm. You've got the rest of the coaches around, and whether they're going to be here in December or not, they have professional obligations. They have obligations to their players in their position rooms and on their offense or defense. And so we'll see how much pride plays a role here. And quite frankly, there are going to be players and coaches auditioning for their next jobs based on these next 6 games here in the regular season. And we'll see if Penn State can earn a 7th game beyond that. But Daniel, ultimately, when you think about that quick whiplash, and that's kind of the term I brought up to some friends and family today, like asking me, how do I feel about it? It feels like whiplash because we mentioned it on the podcast yesterday. He goes from being the guy clearly on top of the pyramid. Nothing happens in Lash if he doesn't give the seal of approval for it. And now he's not employed by this team. He doesn't have an office in the Lash building anymore. It is very, very jarring how that goes from point A to point B. So what is your, I guess, a kind of interest on how the program at large reacts to this moving forward? Because they got a job to do: Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, and then everything beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, they have a quick turnaround to get right. You factor in you're going to travel, so you lose maybe another day to sit with things a little bit, get rolling. But I do think that in terms of people inside the program to lead it, who are well respected, who know how things go, and maybe who might know what buttons to push emotionally to keep this team moving forward. I think Terry Smith is a really good person to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think that you look at where this program is right now. There's just so many external factors. I do think that one thing to note: transfer portal won't open for Penn State until after a new coach is hired. That's a little bit of a change from the past. Like, you won't have that feeding frenzy happen where, guys are going every which way. On top of that, the fact that this happened 6 games into the season, that means that, there won't be a huge influx of guys redshirting, pulling away from the program to preserve their years of eligibility. But yeah, I mean, I think that where Penn State is right now, what they're looking at moving forward, it's a tricky spot because you don't want the bottom to fall out. And I think that's the easiest thing that can happen. I think you do bring up a good point in terms of the audition process, where maybe a couple of years ago, maybe the first time I covered a coach firing in 2015, like, all these guys are stuck. So they can, they know they'll be back the next year. So they can do what they want. They can go in the shell. They can go, they can go all out. They can do whatever they want. Now, if there's guys that are maybe thinking about going into the portal, you can put some good tape together now down the stretch. You can make some impressions. You can put something together that way. I think
And
now
Daniel, I didn't even. I mean, the portal's obviously looming. In my mind, you're also trying to get film on, so whoever takes over this program reviews it and says who showed up when it got ugly. Who
yes.
is actually invested here. And initially, I thought portal, and as you're kind of describing it, I'm like, well, shoot, what about the next head coach? He's going to want to evaluate what went down here
Hmm.
during these 6 games. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to be gained individually, and additionally, there's a lot to be lost if you don't show up to this moment.
Yeah, and it's tough to think about. I mean, you've got 18 to 23. Might be a couple, might be one 24-year-old in there now. And that's a tough age to work through emotional things. And I'm working on a post right now where I, spend some time throughout the afternoon checking in on social media accounts for the players, scrolling through some Twitter accounts, going through some Instagram stories. And I think a theme that emerged is a lot of broken heart emojis used by a lot of players. The word love used a lot when talking about James Franklin, and also a lot of pictures of families with James Franklin, especially for the younger players, the freshmen and then the committed seniors. A lot of photos of on visits of their whole families with James Franklin, and then maybe on a visit, it's not just Franklin and the player. It's Anthony Donka had a photo of him, Phil Troutline, James Franklin in front of a Christmas tree. Brady O'Hara had a picture with him, Franklin, Terry Smith together. I think that speaks to that family environment that we talk to a lot, and we're just going to learn a lot about these players to see how they respond. I think that we think we have a good idea, a good handle on who these guys are, but this is a different type of adversity than just 3-game losing streak. Like this is life changing, for some of these guys. So it's going to be interesting couple of weeks to follow, and the different dimensions that are at play right now.
One of the final things that James Franklin told us as head coach of Penn State is that his program has never faced adversity like this. I think you pile that on a little bit more now with James Franklin walking out that door, and you wonder, okay, well, how do they respond against Iowa? And we'll see. They got a new quarterback. We talked about that a lot on the post-game podcast. You're not just working with the new head coach right now and interim Terry Smith, but you're going to have Ethan Grunkemeyer, redshirt freshman, stepping up as your QB1 with Drew Aller out for the season with that injury he suffered on Saturday. And his career is over here at Penn State and at the college level. So suddenly it's such a pivot point, such a moment of change. And it's only the second week of October. And so a long way to go here for the program and uncharted territory in so many ways. And Daniel, when we look at what happens next here without James Franklin involved, what are you most curious about for the coaching staff? Maybe some adjustments. There's got to be a collaborative effort here right now, because although Terry Smith is the interim head coach, I don't necessarily know that he's in a position where he's going to be the guy who gives the green light or the red light to things. I'm curious what kind of autonomy the coordinators have here. And speaking of auditions, Andy Kotelnicki doesn't seem like a guy who's going to be retained. I mean, if I had to forecast this process, perhaps I'm wrong, but as of now, he doesn't seem like someone who's here for the long term at Penn State based on how things have gone, based on the head coach who brought him in not being here anymore. I know James also brought in Jim Knowles, but to me, a 3-year, $9+ million deal is a little bit different of a conversation, although we should note Penn State clearly not afraid to swallow a bit of money to make it move that it deems necessary. But what are you curious about what the staff does? We talked about the players angle. What about the staff?
Yeah, I think that it's an all hands on deck type situation. I know that we talked about when Mike Yurcich was fired a couple of years ago, the shuffling that happened, and different guys stepping into different roles and having to take over different things. I think that we'll see that maybe a little bit more like holistically of people stepping up. Given the way that Franklin operated in terms of being that CEO head coach, on the one hand, it's sort of like, he treated Andy Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles like the head coaches of their respective side of the ball. But on the other hand, because he was that CEO, like he was top of the flow chart, like the decision chart started with him. That's why he's got the play sheet out there. That's why he's on the mic. Like he knows what's going on at all times. So I think that that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. I do think that maybe you put the spotlight a little bit more on Andy Kotelnicki, given that Terry Smith is coming from the defensive side of the ball.
Daniel, maybe we get a little answer for everybody on that screams James Franklin meddles too much, or they say James Franklin needs to interject more. There's always the two polar opposite opinions of why isn't James determining what Andy does, or why is James just not staying away from Andy and letting him do whatever he wants. James is not in the equation anymore.
Yeah, it's a little bit of like gallows humor. It's like the monkey's paw, where it's like, okay, like we want to see what this looks like without James Franklin, quote unquote, meddling in it. Well, you're going to see it now. And so, but yeah, I mean, I think you really do look at Andy Kotelnicki because, really now, like theoretically, Terry Smith is above him in the hierarchy now, but it's different. And so, how is he going to run things? How is he going to organize that unit? How is he going to rally them? I know that he's someone that has been seen as a potential head coaching candidate. So this is an opportunity for him to maybe audition a little bit in a different way than he'd been auditioning the past year and a half. I do think that when you talk about staff dynamics, I know that Penn State is the type of program where the, type of coach it can attract. I think you looked at the hot board you had put together. There are, I feel like, a decent number of like CEO type coaches. It's not as opposed to other programs that are maybe a little bit more lower tier or trying to move up. There, the formula really seems to be hire that hot young play caller to generate the excitement and go. So I do think that when you forecast things forward, a lot of people that are on the staff, it could be easy to see them being retained, depending on who comes in. So we'll see what this looks like, but I do think that in terms of performance, I think the defense definitely going to be under the microscope, just given how the past couple of weeks went. But I think in terms of the like bigger picture, like what is going on here? How are things working? How are things different now that you've removed James Franklin from the equation? Like, we're going to learn a lot about Andy Kotelnicki and this offense.
Andy Kotelnicki for the first time with a Penn State logo on his chest, not working with James Franklin, not working with Drew Aller. Let's see what that looks like, because it's going to be much different, and maybe it won't look all that different, but honestly, we just don't know quite yet. We'll get to that hot board in a second, maybe bounce around a couple of names in a moment, but we should get to the fact that Terry Smith was the name that I think everybody that when we were kind of, talking about in the press box last night, aware that this might happen in the near term, was like, okay, well, who takes over as an interim? Everyone said Terry Smith is going to be that guy. I think that was an easy angle to take. But ultimately, Terry Smith's someone who, when you think about who could be retained, who has the roots here in State College, he's also at the top of that list. Like, who's still here when the next coach takes over, makes the hires that he deems necessary, but also maybe keeps a few around. And Terry Smith, I think, is the number one candidate there. We'll see. Maybe he takes this moment to chase different aspirations for himself. He's been here 12 years. He played here. But, there's points in your life where you can start a new chapter. Maybe this is a chance where he goes explores that. But Terry Smith, to me, I've always been impressed by his demeanor. He has always been described as the most straight shooter in the building. I think even James Franklin is the one who has gotten some tough medicine from Terry Smith at times. And I can guarantee you this, that there was no one that was as consistently in James Franklin's inner circle, quote unquote, since 2014 as much as Terry Smith. Because, you had other guys in there. Brent Pry spent some time in that. Then he goes out and does his own thing. Terry Smith's been there every step of the way. He's been there for the highs, for the lows, for ugly times, personal stuff. And so to me, this is going to be pretty cool, because we're going to talk to Terry on Monday, and make sure you follow our coverage on Monday afternoon, because we're not just getting Terry. As I mentioned, we're getting Pat Kraft, the athletic director, to break this thing down a bit more. But Daniel, from that perspective, Terry Smith's opportunity here, what he means to the team, what it might mean for his career, this 6-game sample size. What's your opinion on this subject?
I think a big question that is going to have to be asked of Terry Smith on Monday is, do you want the job? Like, are you auditioning for this? Are you viewing yourself as a caretaker, or are you trying to enter the mix? Do you want to be that internal candidate? You see it happen sometimes. Dabo Sweeney was an interim, back in the day at Clemson. And I think that also, I think, affects the dynamic of things moving forward, where, how that interim is approaching things. My personal experience, 2015, you had interim coach Mike Loxley at Maryland taking over for Randy Edsall. That was someone who wanted that job bad. that was someone who was auditioning for it. And that's a different dynamic than someone who might view themselves as a caretaker, getting things to the finish line, that sort of thing. I also think the new coach coming in, it's going to be really interesting when you think about the incumbent staff and how James Franklin built it with the number of lettermen that he had on staff. I do think that it's an interesting dynamic that he built his staff over time with people that are not only tied to him, but are tied to the university. And so you look at people like, a Dion Barnes, a Dan Connor, Terry Smith, everyone else that you can go down the
Ty
list,
Howell.
like Ty Howell,
Yep.
that might be the biggest one, honestly. Like it's different for those guys where, they aren't like Franklin's guys necessarily. There's a connection that goes a little bit deeper. And that's also something that might be a little different from other places that have open coaching jobs. And that is something that when a new coach comes in, that they have to weigh. And I think also if you're Pat Kraft and you're making this hire, what does this coach want to bring in? Do you want to keep some of the infrastructure that's in place that has been very successful for really the past, I think, 10 years? And so you've got a decade of institutional memory of infrastructure. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to clean house? Do you want to, maybe retool instead of rebuild with who you bring in? There's a lot of different ways that you can go at this from. But I think that the incumbent thing right now, though, is that you need to see these assistants putting their best foot forward. Maybe maybe things get loosened up a little bit more. Like, hey, let's push some buttons we didn't push before and see what happens from there. I do think the one thing that if you're an interim coach that you really have to manage is that, we talked about how important auditioning can be. Can't let it happen at the expense of winning games, of being a team. And I think that is a very interesting task as you move forward.
I think we're going to learn a lot about how much this is a team versus how much this is a collection of individuals over the next 6 games. I think that's certainty. And I just wanted to pass along one quote from Pat Kraft. He kind of had a few paragraphs of quotes in a statement released by Penn State. But I think it's important because this basically addresses why this move was made. He started out by saying that Penn State owes, quote, an enormous amount of gratitude for Coach Franklin, who rebuilt our football program into a national power. He won a Big Ten championship, led us to 7 New Year's Six bowl games and a college football playoff appearance. However, we hold our athletics programs to the highest of standards, and we believe this is the right moment for new leadership at the helm of our football program to advance us toward Big Ten and national championships. And we had wondered when this parting of ways would occur, would it be called the parting of ways? Would it be like kind of presented to the public as, two sides shaking hands, walking away and say, thanks for the good times? This was a firing. Penn State fired James Franklin. They paid good money to fire him, and he's moving on to the exit door that way. That means they have to make a significantly strong move on the back end of this. The next move is going to be expensive because I don't think they're going to the bargain bin for their replacement to James Franklin. I laid out several names in our hot board today. We're going to be updating it on a daily basis as we get more information, as we have more conversations, as maybe some coaches decline opportunities. But Daniel, I know you had a chance to review it. I don't want to go through the entire list here. One, because we value our VIP subscribers. And by the way, 60% off. We just brought that on today. Flash sale because of the Franklin move. And there's going to be a lot more VIP content coming. By the way, there's a ton of recruiting content over at Lions247. Come on, Spell decommitted. Leighton Von Brandt decommitted. Gabe Jenkins decommitted. The 2027 recruiting class no longer exists. It was the #1 recruiting class, I think, a week ago with 4 guys. Now it is an empty cupboard. But we will continue to bring you the latest. It will be a lot for our VIP subscribers. Again, 60% off right now. But Daniel, I know you had a chance to check out the names I put out there. Any really pop off the page to you immediately that you think are worth discussing here in our final few minutes of the pod?
I mean, Matt Rule is I don't want to call him an elephant in the room, but maybe the Nittany Lion in the shrine. Is that how you could put him? He is someone who his presence, I think, has always kind of been out there, because he was in the state doing really good things, especially when James Franklin lost to him. Penn State was, kind of stuck in neutral, getting out of the sanctions. And you've got this native son in the state doing things really well. Then you hire Pat Kraft, who was Matt Rule's boss at Temple for a while. And you know that those are, in his introductory news conference, Pat Kraft talked about how close he was with Matt Rule and talking about things in State College. So I think that is something that, really looms out there a little bit and is an interesting dynamic. I know that there's a lot of people, I feel like there's a contingent of the fan base that would really want to have him back. He's someone that I covered a little bit at Temple in 2016. And I, really liked the energy, really fun to be around. Those teams where that 2015, 2016 stretch, a lot of talent, and just fun teams to watch with a good playing style. I think that is something that's out there. The one thing about it that gives me like a little bit of pause is that, Matt Rule's at Nebraska right now. They just got ranked in the top 25 of the AP poll. They're at number 25 after a comeback win against Maryland on Saturday. They're coming to Beaver Stadium in late November. You talk about the idea of bringing that prodigal son who played for the legendary coach of your program home. Well, Matt Rule's at Nebraska. Nebraska just did that when they had Scott Frost, and it didn't go well. I think that Nebraska and Penn State are two programs that are in different places, especially when those hires were made. But I think that the cautionary tale is right there in front of you as you factor in those things as you move forward. I think that was just the one thing that kind of stuck in my head a little bit when thinking about like, oh yeah, let's bring Matt Rule home and let's go for it. Like, those things don't always work as smoothly as you think they might.
Yeah, within the first 90 minutes or so of James Franklin's firing going public, checking in with some people who are really connected in the agent world, which is a world that fortunately I don't spend much time in, but it's time to do it in the next few weeks at least. But Matt Rule's names came up more than any. That's not really surprising. It's kind of an easy connection to make there. That combination of State College high graduate, former Penn State player, former Pat Kraft employee. It's very difficult to look away from that. And you mentioned that they're ranked inside the top 25 now. They're coming off a 7-6 season. They're 5-1 right now, and 7-6 doesn't sound like much, but that's a Nebraska team that had 6 consecutive seasons under 500 before last year, and they're well on their way toward eclipsing that mark again this year and building upon that. I just wanted to get into maybe 2 more names from this list, which has about 9 or 10 on it. Curt Cignetti, man. I mean, is there a more hotter name in college football right now? I don't think so. And it's funny because you'd think a guy like this who goes from James Madison and has all that success, going to 3 national semifinals at the FCS level, going to a national championship at the FCS level. They jump to FBS. He wins 11 games in 2023, and then Indiana poaches him away. And then Indiana goes to the playoff. And then you say, well, that's not going to happen again, right? Like, they're going to fall back to earth. They went out to Eugene, Oregon, and won by 10 points against Oregon. They're not the number 3 team in the country. And it's a bizarro world when we've got James Franklin being fired here at Penn State. You look over at Indiana, they're number 3 in the country. I mean, we saw Penn State pulverize Indiana a bunch earlier in James Franklin's tenure. They were a low rung of the ladder type team here in the Big Ten. That has changed. They're compensating Cignetti very well, but that one is hard to ignore in terms of Pat Kraft at least doing his diligence to see where Cignetti stands if he wants to take another step in his career at this age. Curious about that. And then just kind of giving you a look toward our diversity, I guess, of some of the names we have. Joe Brady, I felt, was necessary to include on this list. He is a guy that it was here at Penn State a while back. He was a graduate assistant in 2015 and 2016. He was part of the staff during that Big Ten championship run. He got a master's degree from this university. He's only 36 right now, but he was an NFL offensive coordinator at 31 years old, working for Matt Rule with the Carolina Panthers. Rule fired him with Carolina. Then Rule was fired by Carolina. And it's hard for me to fixate on their time in Carolina and the failures there, because if you've been paying attention the last decade, I don't know that any NFL team has looked worse consistently than the Carolina Panthers. So how much is that them? How much is that organizational and ownership issues? But I do know before the Carolina opportunity, Joe Brady was the passing game coordinator and receivers coach at LSU when they had 5 first-round picks at the receiver position. It felt like he earned the Broyles Award, which is given to the nation's top offensive or top assistant, period, either side of the ball. And, of course, Joe Burrow, that passing game coordinator job looked pretty good because the quarterback was Heisman Trophy winner. He set a lot of records for that offense, and Joe Burrow wasn't exactly lighting things up before that final year with LSU when he became the number one pick. Since then, Brady resurfaced. He's a name that we talked about a couple years ago before Penn State landed Kildalnicki. He was on our offensive coordinator hot board in 2023. At that point, he was a quarterbacks coach for the Buffalo Bills, working with all-pro Josh Allen. He was then promoted to interim offensive coordinator late in 2023. He earned the full-time title. He's been with that since 2004. And obviously, the Buffalo Bills are one of the most successful programs in the NFL recently. And Joe Brady's been a key part of that offensively and helping Josh Allen continue his career forward. But he also has a little bit of a caveat, a note we should mention here. I don't know how it stands with Terry Pegula. I don't know if he'd want to lose his offensive coordinator that he probably appreciates for the Buffalo Bills. But Terry Pegula, for those who don't know, is one of the most prominent supporters of Penn State athletics. That name on the ice hockey arena, that's his. And so he's a guy that I know a lot of people on our board have been clamoring to maybe get a bit more involved, maybe get his name on some football things in the future. And perhaps that's something that Joe Brady brings to the table a little bit more. But just a couple of names to put out there. We got a lot more for you to explore at Lions247.com. And Daniel, I think we're going to step away because we're going to come right back on Monday after our press conference. We'll bring Mark Brennan into the conversation. As I said, he has a piece up with his opinion on James Franklin's dismissal over at Lions247.com. But anything you feel a need to add here before we say goodbye to an unexpected podcast that no one in the Penn State universe could have anticipated happening on October 12th?
Yeah, it's been a crazy 15 days when you think about where we were up in the Beaver Stadium press box pregame for that Oregon game. I know we talked about it last night where an hour before game time, you've got probably 110,000 people in that stadium ready to go. And then the deterioration of it. I mean, that's really the only word I can think of to use to get to this point. Really shocking, really stunning. I mean, I haven't covered anything like it. I feel like a lot of other people haven't either in a lot of different sports, but it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. I think the one thing too that is going to be interesting is that like this is going to be a marathon. You talk about the OC search, you talk about some of the wide receiver coach searches and other position coach searches we've had. Those have been sprints because it's in that condensed December period, or
everyone needs to hire somebody at that point,
yeah,
right? Everyone's trying, everyone's musical chairs at that point.
Well, I mean, it was like less than 2 weeks between Jalen Sider leaving and Stan Drayton getting hired.
Mm-hmm.
But this is it's October 12th. Those conference championship games are like December 6th. And that's when that's the week that you really start to see the movement. And so there's so much time for things to change. So much time for just, different people to emerge, people take themselves out of it, other people put themselves into it. It's going to be really interesting to follow. And that's the thing that, it's a marathon, keep that in mind as we go forward. Take advantage of that Lions247 subscription deal if you haven't already. But I think it's going to be entertaining, really interesting. And I think the opportunity for us to really learn what this Penn State wants to be moving forward.
Yeah, we got a lot to learn. It's the end of an era. We thank James Franklin for speaking with us, dealing with us, interacting with us over all the years. Sometimes we're a lot easier to do that, the good times, and more recently it wasn't as easy for him to deal with us and have those conversations. But he showed up, we showed up, and we got through it together in one way or another. We thank him for that, and we'll see what happens next. Again, we're with Terry Smith and Pat Kraft in Beaver Stadium's media room on Monday afternoon. We'll have full coverage over at Lions247.com. We'll come to you soon after that with another podcast. But for now, on behalf of Daniel, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks for tuning in to the special edition of the Lions247 Podcast.